if I hear what you're saying correctly, any decision on erosion control measures has to be taken in the context that it is virtually impossible not to have some kind of reaction.
Or adverse impact. And you want to minimize that adverse impact. We do that through mitigation or asking the applicant, whether it's the town or a private homeowner, to try to mimic what that natural bluff did or what that beach did. If you put enough nourishment sand on there and at the right times of the year, then it can act exactly as that bluff would as it erodes. So that's the first thing that we ask and put into our permits as an order of conditions, is try to, and we have a lot of long discussions about how much sand to ask for, how much is being provided to the system. The trick is that a lot of that sand is provided in the midst of a storm. So you have a big storm, and anytime I've got some great pictures from last year from Sandy and from Nemo and from Saturn, Nemo and Saturn, were the February and the March storms. And you can see, you know, piles of sand that are in the water column stirred up, and that actually slows down wave damage. And it's all provided right in the midst of a storm. So if you put a bunch of sand on a coastal erosion structure and you only put it in July, well, let's say that all erodes in November, then a big storm comes in February, there's nothing to feed the monster that is this erosion and material. So you want to try to mimic what nature does. And anytime anyone builds anything, we try to get them, if they're adversely impacting a natural resource that's important to everyone, we try to get them to mitigate for that, to make up for that damage, either by building a natural resource area, for instance in a wetland, trying to repair another wetland, or to try to mimic what that bluff is doing and the functions of that bluff.
About which reasonable people can disagree, right?
Sure. There's all kinds of, how much is it providing, how one thing that's
which way is it going, and all
which way is it going? The aesthetics is really interesting to me. I always find an eroding bluff actually fairly, attractive because it's natural. Some people would rather see a vegetated bluff, even if it's vegetated with jute or coir bags and with, implanted beach grass. So vegetation is a less damaging way, for instance, of trying to slow down erosion. So we have a whole continuum of projects you can do, with the seawall being the most likely to cause adverse impacts and retreat causing the least. And you try to get on that continuum and match both people's needs so that you've got some protection, but you're also trying to not hurt other people or other resources in this case.
Yeah, it's a very Solomon-esque kind of process. Well, I know that there's a lot more to come on this subject, and we're not done with it. But because I guess the permit even the permit that was granted last week to the town, they've decided not to follow through on, as I understand it.
There's some issues with the material costs and
availability.
Right.
In a short-term period of time. So anyway, it's a continuing saga. Many people have skin in the game, so to speak, and either intellectual or monetary. So it's something that we'll keep watching.
Yep.
Let's change the subject and talk about the field station and what's going on at the field station these days.
We have a lot going on. One of the most recent things I've done is I purchased basically a timeshare in a high-resolution side-scan sonar equipment. So I'm trying to collect more data that's relative to things like coastal erosion and our eelgrass, and I paid about $10,000 for this boat equipped with this super-duper acoustic backscatter machine that mapped the entire harbor and parts of the East Shore. So one of the things I'm trying to do as a research field station is collect more oceanographic data. We've upped our game quite a bit on collecting water quality samples for both the state and for ourselves in the harbor. We did some pharmaceutical sampling, for instance, outside of the jetties this year for the Cape and for the state.
What does that mean, pharmaceutical
we were looking for a variety of different pharmaceuticals that are in the water column that they're finding up in Boston Harbor.
Natural pharmaceuticals or
things people are taking. Yeah,
really? Scary.
Well, when you and I take medicine, it all doesn't stay with us. Some of it goes away and it goes into our harbors. And right now our harbor is very clean, but they're trying to get a grip on what's happening around the Cape and what areas are point sources. So that's exciting that the state is looking to us to become a point that becomes part of their data set, because Nantucket was really left off of all of the data for a long time. So I've been kind of inserting myself at the state level on that and helping people with grants. We've got our summer session is already scheduled with a ton of different researchers. I'm hosting 2 sets of researchers in 3 weeks from NOAA, MIT, and Woods Hole that are going to do some physical oceanography type stuff. And in January, our next Nantucket semester is going to start. We've got between 10 and 20 students. We're interviewing them right now. This is a program that occurs downtown. They live right in the employee housing for the Nantucket Yacht Club. It's sponsored partially by Remain, is a big sponsor. We've got collaborations with the Athenaeum, with Ryan Mitchell. Of course, the field station sponsors a lot of the equipment. And so we're excited about that. So we're extending our college.
Do they take what kind of course, not load, but variety do they have?
Yeah, it's a great variety. It's 16 credits in 3 months, so it's a full semester.
Full semester.
Yeah, and they're taking everything from field methods to, I'm teaching oceanography, so there'll be an oceanography class.
Where do you do the classes?
At the Athenaeum, at the Greenhound building. We also use sometimes the field station, but we try to keep them downtown as much as we can. So oceanography, coastal and marine biology, a field method course. They're going to have an English component and a component on how to be a scientist, on how to do PowerPoints and things like that. And
how to be a scientist.
How to be a scientist. And Peter Brace is going to teach natural history. So we're going to have a course specifically on the natural history of Nantucket. And so it's a nice variety. We have students that are both liberal arts majors and full science majors. So it's a mix.
So they don't have to have a focus on
marine biology,
something that's great.
Yeah, and they'll live here the whole time, and they'll have their own research projects. So it's similar to what WPI does, the Worcester Polytech kids. They have a research project that runs the whole 3 months.
That's great.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Do they work in teams on these projects, or does each
They
one?
will.
They will.
Yeah, they'll do a capstone just like we did last year. We had a total of 17 students that did individuals and capstone projects.
Was last year the first year you did that?
Yes, that was the very first year we
pilot.
did. Yeah, and we had students that did bycatch measurements for the conch fishery. We had kids that went out on the scallop boats. So that's the nice thing about people say, well, it's cold, it's freezing, how do you get any measurements? But we were able to get some great measurements on the salt marshes, on the disturbation of issues related to the storm. So we were able to evaluate how salt marshes recover from things like Sandy, and we were able to get kids on the scallop boats and actually do some quantitative scallop studies, which you can't do in July, or you can, but it's a different animal then.
Very different.
Yes.
Very different.
These are tough kids, though. They'll be. I keep calling them kids. Some of them are like 30, so they're not necessarily kids. But
you mentioned the coastal management plan earlier, and obviously erosion control is one aspect of that, but there's some other very important pieces.
Oh, exactly.
Of the coastal management plan, and the impact on downtown, for example.
And we're evaluating every town infrastructure and every town road, and a lot of these things are more relevant as far as sea level rise. So how often are we going to have to repair the bulkheads with more storms and with greater storm surges? And the new FEMA flood maps are out. We've presented them twice as the town subcommittee, and we'll probably be doing that again in January. We're almost done with our draft copy of this town coastal management plan. But in addition to erosion control, it's how do we adapt to a rising sea? How much is that going to impact our downtown, most of which is within 2 to 3 feet of sea level? How often are we going to get flooded? What do we request of people? Where do we move town infrastructure? I mean, that's all extremely important because so many of our important buildings are right on the harbor. How does it impact insurance rates? So this all links to financial responsibilities for the town, fiscal responsibility on our tax base, and really planning intelligently. So I think this is going to become more and more important. We're so dependent on the steamship, our lifeline to America, and these are all going to be costs that we're going to have to bear and things that we're going to have to plan for. And it certainly is cheaper to build things smarter ahead of time in areas like Easy Street than to have to do major repairs. Like
there was a new building built on Easy Street just recently, Was that built with any of this in mind?
It should have been, and I think the Concom actually heard some of the issues because it's in land subject to coastal storm flowage. Everything has to be brought up to the 8 or 9 foot FEMA new flood maps, and typically you have breakaway panels underneath so that water can flow underneath. You don't want to bottleneck water. A lot of times flooding happens because you stop water from going one place and dump it on your neighbor's property. Well, we're very, for the Conservation Commission, we try to be very cognizant of that. When people do work around Barrett Point, we don't want people to raise their land and cause excess flooding on their neighbors. So we're trying to be very thoughtful, especially when we look at things like the jetties and the work that we're going to do downtown and how we provide docks. You know, should we set aside more money for dock repair? You know, what kind of new types of docks should we be looking at? So this is all super important for our infrastructure and for what makes Nantucket Nantucket.
How do you think what kind of response have you gotten to this so far?
Well, we want more people to come to our meetings. We have 2 or 3 people in the public. Our meetings are normally every other Monday from 5 to 7 at the training room at the police station for the coastal management plan. And you can write me and get on and the email list, and I'll send you the agenda. We're almost done with our draft. People might recall that this was part of the town meeting initiative to have a coastal management plan.
But wasn't it state mandated as well?
No, it wasn't mandated. This is all internal. This is all just for Nantucket. We will be probably one of the first communities in the U.S. to have a coastal management plan specifically addressing...
Like our shellfish management
Yes,
plan.
exactly, and the harbor management plan. So all of this kind of was... we are being very forward-thinking in these things. The trick is to actually listen to our own advice.
Well, Sarah, it's great to catch up with you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too.
Thank you, Sarah Oktay.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.